Before we start our panel, again, I'd like to thank our sponsors. And at the end of this, I'm going to ask everyone to name who all our sponsors are. So, our networking sponsor is Key Construction Services. Our corporate sponsors, Elevate Northeast, Northmark, U.S. Pavement Services, Inspired Technology, and Mogul DeStefano Architects. I want to thank them very much for sponsoring, and I think we have, yeah, they're all here. So we are going to begin our panel, and I want to introduce our moderator for the panel, is Beth Waterfall of Elevate Northeast.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Kara. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I know I talked to a couple people who are like, oh, that event, the construction event on Thursday, or what day is that next week? And I said Thursday. U.S. Open. So thank you for those who are here instead of at the U.S. Open or who battled the traffic. I know it was a little tough this morning. But thank you, and thank you to Rick, of course, and the New England Real Estate Journal for having this event today and for being such a great partner to Elevate Northeast. Elevate Northeast is a 501c3 nonprofit. We do community education and outreach events, and we also help licensed applicants. We can work with them on their positive impact plan and help them through that process as well. I'm also a marketing consultant to a bunch of cannabis businesses here in Massachusetts, and I'm proud to be, I think this is the fourth time we've done this event together, Rick. So thank you all for being here. I think we should just start off with a nice little introduction for our panelists. We'll just go down the line. Jamie, would you mind telling folks about yourself and a little bit about your background and why they should listen to you today?
No, I don't know if you should listen, but they brought me up here to speak. So, hi, my name is Jamie Lewis. I have about 20 years of operational experience in the cannabis industry. A lot of my skill set falls just in most states, being new states, the startup and setup of the operation. So everything from the vision and dream of owner-operators or investors in terms of what they want to do with facilities, all the way through the construction, build-out, and setup, and creating the culture of the team that then runs the operations. I've operated in about 11 states to date, give or take a few that I might have forgotten about. And through that process, I have developed very close relationships with real estate developers and real estate agents, and all things around seeking, sourcing, and really hunting properties, both from the regulatory level at the state as well as the local municipalities. So I look forward to meeting all of you and adding you to my list. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. And then we have George Mottner from Key Construction Solutions, also today's networking sponsor. George, welcome. Tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Sure. I am George with Key Construction. We've been in business since 2006. We've been in the cannabis space for 5 years now. We got our start doing commercial construction, a lot of life science work, and have since shifted part of our workflow into cannabis. So I hope to talk to all of you today and hope I can be somewhat informative.
Thank you, George. Then we have Mark Weinstein from East Coast Global Insurance. Mark, tell us about yourself.
Good morning, everybody. I am Mark Weinstein, the principal of East Coast Global Insurance in Somersworth, New Hampshire. And I've been in the property and casualty insurance business for just about 30 years. And the agency focuses on what we consider to be hard-to-place insurance. And as everybody can imagine, cannabis falls deeply within that space. So it keeps us busy, it keeps us active, and we're having a lot of fun in the space at this point in time. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you have, and looking forward to have a chance to meet everybody.
Thank you, Mark. And last but not least, Jeff Similian, real estate broker, commercial real estate broker, and cannabis business operator. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Jeff.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you all. My name is Jeff Similian. I'm a commercial real estate broker by trade. This is how I got here. This is why I'm here. And also during my process in learning about commercial real estate, I got introduced to cannabis in 2016 when it became legal in Massachusetts. And that really sparked my interest for me to learn more about cannabis and also to get involved in it. So I applied for my license and got approved in 2019. and I'm in the process of currently opening up a store in Dorchester, which is where I grew up. So I have some knowledge in commercial real estate and navigating the process and helping others, and also helping myself, and also getting, hopefully getting my store open shortly. So, so I have some, knowledge that I could share. So I'm, looking to share that as well today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for being here. I figured we'd start kind of with the most important piece, location, 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 right? So Jeff, how important is real estate for someone looking to build a cannabis facility? And how does location also influence investors, so fundraising, and then eventually down the line, the customers?
Location is very important, given the fact that, obviously it's a retail, so you want exposure, you want accessibility, all those different things for people to come into your store. That's one aspect, but the most important aspect for you to be able to get your business up and running, it's funding. Cannabis being federally illegal, so it's hard for people to get, investors, bankers, and things like that. So the best way to leverage and get a bank or investors to help out or to provide funding is to leverage the real estate. So it's very, very important in the beginning to have access to the real estate, to have control of it, to be able to leverage that, to get funding for whether it's for renovation and for operations. So it's very important to have control of your real estate rather than having just a lease in place.
And does that transcend from retail, cultivation, kind of across the board?
Across the board. For any business, real estate is very, very important because, whatever business you have to put under real estate for you to operate it. So that's a very important piece.
Thanks, Jeff. Jamie, I'm going to ask you to kind of talk about the actual communities where we're buying our property. Certainly things have changed, but any license applicant, they have to go through the process of getting a host community agreement. And there are some towns that are open to cannabis and some that are not. So Jamie, can you talk a little bit just about why the host community agreement situation exists and kind of how it's changed over the past couple of years for some towns?
Yeah, Massachusetts specifically, just honing in on that because, not that Massachusetts is a bubble anymore. We now have a bunch of states that are now engaging in cannabis. So Massachusetts is very specific with a host community agreement that is required for owner-operators to go forward with in a negotiation process with the municipality. It's in statute currently that they're limited to a certain sort of percentage of revenue that they can attach themselves to. And really, they're supposed to show forth that this money is used for any means around policing or any sort of protections they have to add in for these facilities being located in their municipalities. There's been a ton of press recently about a gentleman in Fall River who was just recently under investigation and indictment by the federal government, which has since changed the conversation across the country now as we see it, which us in the cannabis industry have referred to as shakedowns from cities and municipalities for attaching themselves to us for unnecessary things, really. Moving forward, we've seen it sort of loosen up in terms of the negotiation processes. I specifically, when I'm working with owner-operators through Coldwater Consulting, I definitely look for municipalities that are more favorable on the host community agreement side. So I'll look for it. It's a public document. I'll start doing a little bit of investigation. We really like to see the templates just because we can move forward quicker with those pieces. And a lot of times I'll work with investors or property owners who are in municipalities who are curious about the value of their property, just like the gentleman to the left was speaking about in regards to the investment opportunity. So working with those real estate developers or owner operators on the property, looking at the host community agreement, their zoning, and then layering in what the value of the property overall is to an owner operator. The state of Massachusetts has become a little more saturated in terms of, municipalities that are engaging. But I say that in the sense that, I've been operating in this state under the medical. I was one of the first medical licenses to go forward under good chemistry. And through that process, there was only at that time 12, 15 municipalities. So it's certainly a different conversation for me. It's the devil I know that it's certainly loosened up here. But when we move forward with Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and even now Rhode Island, we see none of those host community agreements going forward. There's some statute that points out some additional tax benefits. So really what we've changed the conversation to be is that if you want these in your municipality, you get a tax benefit from the excise. So we learned as an industry how to lobby better in terms of that piece. So I see some positive changes around the host community agreement specifically.
Thanks, Jamie. And it's important for not just the owners that are applying for the license to be aware of these situations. I would argue that it's important for any of the real estate agents, the construction businesses that are looking to work with these businesses, because towns are changing. Jeff, when we talked the other day, you mentioned Braintree. Do you want to talk briefly about Braintree? What's going on there?
Yes, well, from what I heard, and one of my friends recently, I know Braintree was one of the municipalities that wasn't allowing cannabis, and as of late, they're allowing it now. So, well, just cultivation, not retail yet. So some of it is due to tax break, some of these municipalities are actually changing, their regulations now, and allowing cannabis businesses to open up. And I know Quincy is the one other one that was only medical in 2016, and I believe there was about 2 or 3 applications now for recreational as well.
Yeah, and I live in a town, Norwell, Snorwell, kind of a small town on the South Shore, and the South Shore has been kind of inhospitable in many ways to the cannabis industry. But for example, a couple of years ago at Norwell's town meeting, we flipped it. So recreational or adult use cannabis businesses had previously been banned from town. But this particular measure, also an important thing to kind of pay attention to, was for specific license types. So no retail, no delivery, but cultivation facilities, laboratories. So these opportunities are popping up for the folks that are, paying attention and getting involved with those towns too. So I'm going to move along to all right, we've got the location, we have our host community agreement, we're moving along. So George, it's time to build a retrofit. Can you talk about the differences between starting from scratch and retrofitting an existing facility for cannabis here in Mass?
Sure. So obviously, retrofitting is going to be less expensive if it makes sense. The first question I like to ask people when they're thinking of starting a business is, what do you plan on doing in the building? Are you growing? Are you manufacturing, processing, packaging? These answers affect what type of space you need, your power requirements, your utility requirements, gas and water. Then if you look at an existing building, understanding what you're going to be doing in the space, there are things you have to look at, like how high the rooms are, what can you hang from the existing structure, is it going to support the weight that you're going to impose on it? Aside from that, what are the floors like? Are they in good enough condition? Is there a floor below you where your floor system could flex and cause an issue? How much power do you have? How easy is it to get power? There's a whole host of questions and conversations that can take place. A lot of times you look at an existing building, and if one of those things is deficient, then it's either time to move on or find a location that better suits your conditions of satisfaction. And again, a lot of times it turns out that the best option is to start from scratch. This, of course, costs more, but you get exactly what you want. And again, it takes longer, but I see end users doing either and both. It really depends upon what meets their needs the best.
I'm just going to jump into
Please.
what George points out, just with real estate agents, developers in the room. It's really just, a lot of times as owner-operators, we're forced into locations. We can't really pick and choose. So then working with someone on the construction side that has a knowledge, or a client that has a knowledge of it, because I've come into projects with buildings that I've had to retrofit where they just had to buy them or they thought it was a great deal, and with an additional $3.5 million, we can make it work, right? So therein lies another available piece of property now back on the market. So it's a hurry, oh shit, I didn't know that was gonna cost that sort of reaction. That is hugely important. So if your clients or people you're working with don't understand the simple programming of these facilities, indoor cultivation specifically is very difficult. And I speak as a woman who's built out about 15 of these, and I've lost about 30 years off my life doing it. So there's a lot of variables in place. So it's very important to work with an educated team in terms of sourcing even the property.
And unfortunately, that happens a lot where, I come to the table and the site is already selected and there's no options. And at that point, you know, the hard truth of realizing the deficiencies of the existing facility are made known, and there are compromises that need to be made, and, you know, large renovations that have to take place to strengthen an entire roof structure or redo floors, you know, difficult scenarios of getting utilities, gas and electric, long waiting times, things like that, that it always helps to have an educated team with you while you're selecting a property.
Just even with the civil site work, guys, I mean, that too in itself, understanding the local special permitting process and paying close attention to that. But cultivation, manufacturing, and then you have retail too. I just want to point this out, that in the beginning we were given a lot of bones, so to speak. Go into these industrial parks, park your retail. The conversation has changed. Now a lot of my clients want to see prime real estate with retail, right? So that's been a little easier in terms of working with municipalities for that, but there's still a lot of security requirements, and there is a lot of needs that are specific to retail design that very much could dictate the success of a facility. And what was always pointed out, the investment opportunities for that facility, right? So
One more thing to pass the baton to Mark to my left is that in multi-tenanted buildings, a lot of people don't realize at first the implications that that could have. And I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, we, from a, if you just want to look at it from a building owner standpoint or a landlord standpoint, we've run into enormous issues with landlords, you know, renting space to people in the cannabis business, and then finding out after the fact that the insurance carrier that they're dealing with now wants to have no interest in insuring that building anymore. So that has caused enormous issues from our side in having to deal with that. There are, you know, there are some carriers, they're not standing at your door. There are not a lot of them. We don't have a big line of companies. So you need to be able to deal with that and be prepared to manage that aspect. Where we find issues from the insurance side is the underwriting process in the cannabis space is longer. There's more data that's involved. It's much more in-depth. So working with brokers that are knowledgeable in this space so that they can educate you on what that process is going to be, because ultimately, like with any insurance situation that you arise, no one's interested in having any surprises. And we're dealing with surprises on a day in and day out basis. So it's extremely important from that side. And, you know, whether or not landlords are going to try to pass additional costs on, there are lease issues that arise from that standpoint. And it's you know, it's problematic. It is dealt with if you surround yourself and you build the team around you of people that have the knowledge and that, like with anything, have gone through the experience before. That's the way people learn how to do this. And as in any business, a quote that we use all the time is that you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes this is how you learn it. So it's a process, and I'll leave it at that.
the other point too is, what's being pointed out is this is federally illegal. So the banking, if you have clients who have, a lot of times people will bring me in to look at properties. I have an owner who has a piece of property and wants to know if it's viable to lease to a cannabis company or to sell, put on the market. This is a really good business for owner-operators right now sitting on property. Obviously, as we know in the real estate market, selling anything right now is good. But right now on the manufacturing and operational side, there are a lot of people that contact me, say, I have this piece of property. If there's any banking, any attachment to banking, and they want to lease it, there's a huge concern there, right? So a lot of times in those leases, it says anything that is federally illegal is not allowed. It will deem this lease, not and void. The landlord can kick you out. Something as simple as that, and I'm sure a lot of lawyers that are listening or watching won't like this, but if you could just work with your clients to take that piece out, it would save a lot, because we can't get licenses at the state level, because believe it or not, the agents at the state level actually read page by page of those leases, all 32 of them, even the plans. Crazy enough. I didn't know it was possible. But they read it and they see things, they redline it, and then we get denied a license just simply based off of that. A lot of banks won't move forward with working with owner-operators if you disclose it's cannabis, depending on the banks. Bank of America, right? That's a big one. Chase. Good luck. So there's a lot of levels that you really have to think about. The best viable thing I often offer to owners who own property is to sell it. That's the easiest. And there is a lot of liquid and interest in selling properties on the investment side.
Thanks, Jamie. And just let's stay on that and flip it over to Jeff to talk a little bit more about the differences that folks should be aware of when it comes to owning versus leasing a space for a cannabis business. Jamie talked about banking, a little bit of insurance. What else?
I mean, those are the two main aspect of that. I mean, leases, having ownership, again, it gives you that leverage for you to get, to be able to leverage and get a loan from a bank. The lease aspect, it makes it tougher for a lot of different reasons, insurance as well, and not being able to have control of the property. You know, I've seen from my experience where 2018, 17, 18, I've had, you know, clients that I was the broker helping them source a location, and they lost a lot of money just by paying a lease and as they go through the process. So for me personally, that's not something I'll ever advise somebody to do, to lease a space. My advice is always, you know, acquire the property just so you could have control of it. Not only currently as you're going through the process, also, you know, in the future, 10, 15 years, if you don't want to run our business anymore, now you could sell the business, but also maintain ownership of the property and continue receiving, you know, a rent payment on our property. So those are two reasons that for me, ownership is always more important than leasing.
And does anybody want to add from the landlord's perspective? Jamie?
Yeah, I just want to point out too, just a sort of, you know, and offer a different approach that I advise a lot of clients on. I work with a lot of owner operators who don't have a lot of liquid, right? So if they're able to work out some sort of situation where they can purchase the property and then have an investor have a piece of property that they buy for the client. So we'll shop for real estate and we're looking, you know, $3.5 to $5 million for a specific facility. We'll find an investor who wants to park their money, right? There's a lot of investors who like to put their money in real estate. It's safe, especially on the cannabis side now, because what we're seeing is that these are long-term tenants who take very good care of their facilities and they put a lot of infrastructure into it. So lease buyback deals I love for clients if it's favorable and reasonable. So there's a lot of opportunity on that side in some of these more restricted markets where you can't necessarily go for a license, but you can certainly have an opportunity to allow some owner operators to have access to liquid cash at that point. And then a nice, comfortable sort of real estate development deal on top of that too, right? Where a contractor or construction crew will come out and build the facility and lease it back. I will say in the beginning stages, don't get excited. We were seeing them at 25%. It's now come down, so it's favorable for us at 10 to 12. And those are favorable for us in the sense that we don't have access to banking. So thinking creatively in working with clients and properties has always been very favorable for us in the industry, especially on that cash and availability to it so we can pay George to build our facilities out.
Mark, anything you want to add about landlords and insurance when they're dealing with their tenants?
No, that's what I discussed before. So I think it's pretty clear from a landlord standpoint. I'm not saying do not rent to cannabis people, but just be aware of what concerns are going to be coming your way and deal with it well ahead of time, so that you can make sure that from the insurance standpoint that you have formal documentation from your insurance carrier that either they're happy with what you're doing or they're not happy about it. There's a lot of people that try to sort of skirt around it. We get a lot of applications that people write down that they're having agricultural products in their building, and then that forces us to ask that question immediately. And what we don't want, and what we, sometimes we end up seeing is ultimately when people misrepresent the situation and they provide erroneous data, insurance companies are potentially going to come back and say, we're not paying the claim. So if there is a situation like that, you want to be completely forthright about what's going on and make sure that there's ultimate clarity from an underwriting standpoint. Because at the end of the day, everybody buys their insurance products. They're not happy about what they have to pay for it, and we just want to make sure that the claim is going to get paid at the end of the day. Nobody wants to be involved in that conversation where you didn't tell me this, so now the policy is not going to respond, and it's not going to do what it was intended to do.
Jamie, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Trying not to. There's so much there, though. This is huge. I mean, when you think about the fact that we can't even have access to just simple banking, but I have a question too. Like, what success have you seen in terms of the minimal amount of insurance companies that are providing insurance for the cannabis industry? the success with leases, is there specific states that are more favorable nationally that you're seeing success in? Specific banks, maybe? Can we lay that one out there? I'm curious.
Banks I can't talk to.
I know.
Yeah.
Damn it.
From a state standpoint, we have not had a lot of pushback regarding specific states. We want to work in this state, we don't want to work in this state. If the insurance companies are in the business, they're in the business. The key is they want to make sure that the licenses are approved. And, there was, prior when this thing was, we're really starting out, insurances were getting written. The insurance companies have no idea what they're getting their hands involved in. And a lot of them, have paid claims that they were not intending to pay, and now they're not in the cannabis business anymore. At this point, as part of the application process, the licensing aspect now is being disclosed on an upfront basis, and that has to be dealt with. And, in order to get a license, we just finished a process for a client in Maine, and in order for them to get their conditional license to move forward, we had to provide insurance documentation even before the license was granted. So people are getting smarter about this, they're dealing with it, and it goes back to the point that I was saying, as to any connection to the cannabis space, my advice is to provide more than ample time to deal with it, because it's not going to happen overnight. And, we're used to, in the insurance business, sometimes somebody will call you and say, listen, I bought a building, we're closing on it tomorrow, I need a binder. And, for standardized stuff, we'll deal with it. We're not happy about it, but we manage it. And from this standpoint, the binder's not going to show up. So there are delays that get taken into consideration.
Thank you. All right, let's get back to the construction side of things. The past couple years with COVID changed everything, right? And certainly the cannabis industry, there's this adage that it's like dog years. So 1 year in cannabis is like 7 years. So where we had 2 years kind of off, the cannabis industry was certainly growing, about 14 years. So I'm curious, George, if you can talk about, as people are building their facilities, a lot of folks were initially trying to do the Apple Store, the MedMen look, but how has that changed in design, and also as it relates to materials people are using?
So in construction, there are two things that are happening now that I see. First thing, there's a real deficiency in certain materials. So getting anything related to power, it can take up to a year to get switch gear, things like that. So, I've had clients that have talked about phasing a project, getting a phase online that doesn't require the power upgrade yet, and dividing the job so that they can be cash positive while we wait for gear to show up. So that is really changing the approach of a lot of investors and a lot of operators, and it changes by the month. Some months FRP is difficult to get, insulated metal panels are difficult to get. Overall, what I'm finding is that there's been a shift, and this is not an official opinion, but my own opinion, there's been a shift of people wanting to do less large-scale grow and go more into manufacturing and processing. I think that because the price of flower is decreasing at a pretty steady rate, the business models that people had where they thought they were going to be crushing it in 3 years, paying off their debt, it's starting to hit a sadder reality that's going to take longer as there's more facilities coming online, the price is coming down. So I think people are tending to focus more on really craft product in smaller batches and more on processing where you can buy bulk flour or use flour that's not necessarily the greatest product and make their money that way.
A lot with market assumptions right there. I mean,
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite,
Again, not an official.
favorite conversations, George. We can't do, that's a whole other panel, Beth. But just to jump in, what George is pointing out is know your market, right? So we currently have Massachusetts, that's an existing market. I came from the West, so I came from California, Colorado, Nevada. So if you want to know what Massachusetts is going to look like, we sort of have it with the history of what's happened. But with that said, I think it gets even more competitive, and what I love to see is there'll be quality and very successful owner-operators moving forward that follow the market, and it is very important for those to think about the construction costs, the upfront costs, the facility design. And what I'm seeing on the client side is now people are actually coming with much smaller budgets, which are much more rational, because, you know, when you come to me with a $22 million budget, you got to go get that money. So it's a big budget. But I think, too, in this specific space in Massachusetts, we are going to see a lot less on the cultivation side, more on the manufacturing, and then consolidation. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But in New York, in upstate New York, there'll be a substantial amount of cultivation infrastructure put in place, though outdoor. Connecticut will wait for the lottery to see who comes forward. But there'll be a ton of MSOs that are seeking, you know, large cultivation facilities in Connecticut, too, I would assume. And then in Jersey, I think with everything going on, that's going to be the real sort of Colorado market, because they opened it up. So there's going to be a lot of licensees, a lot of opportunity for property. But in Massachusetts, we're going to see it become like a real stable industry. So it will be very competitive.
I just wanted to add from a building and a construction standpoint, tying it back to the insurance side of it, what we see a lot is the more homework that, especially from a cultivation standpoint, the owners are doing regarding their lighting systems, regarding their watering systems. All of this is part of the underwriting process that we get asked about, that we go through. So the tighter these systems are, the better that the construction field is in dealing with these and learning about it, is going to ultimately benefit the owner-operators from a long-term cost standpoint. And, you know, that's what we're seeing on an ongoing basis. People are upgrading their systems. They're getting this. And it's interesting from an owner standpoint is that owners learn a lot going through the underwriting process, because in the applications there's very specific data that's requested. And the insurance companies are learning this as well as they go along. So once again, back to the timing of it, sometimes it's good to go through that. People don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have to deal with the insurance piece. I'm going to hold off as long as humanly possible in order to deal with it. But you can also educate yourself as an owner in this space and saying, listen, what is being asked about? What is being talked about? Ultimately, how do I mitigate my risk the best way possible? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to purchase product. But we want to make sure that the insurance product that you're going to buy is going to be the most cost-effective way to do it. And as with anything, the higher the risk for the insurance company, the more uncomfortable underwriting is with what you're doing, the higher the cost is going to be. So our ultimate goal is to make them as comfortable as possible.
You have to have a strong budget. What I'll work with clients on is the budget and operational plan, because my insurance guy is going to ask me how many plants are in my facility and what rooms are going to hold what plants. So it's no similar than, I come from an agricultural farming background. When you assess a chicken farm, right, you know how many baby chickens, big chickens, and ready to, you know, harvest and eat chickens. But at the end of the day, it's the same on the cultivation side. And if they don't have that in the beginning, they're going to be terrible at the programming. That's going to provide the architectural layout. That's going to be very costly for George. And don't show up to George without a process piping for your fertigation, okay? He's not going to be happy. So you got to make sure you have everything in motion. But at the very beginning, faulty information with your insurance will be held up at the state level. So I've had clients come to me and it takes them 6 months to slow it down, because they then have to go back and get their harvest schedule together, because they don't even know how their room cycles are going to flow. So design is a whole very specific piece on the cultivation side that very much dictates your revenue and your success of a facility, but it all starts in the very beginning. You got to have your programming solid.
Thanks, Jamie. And my next question, I think, will be for basically George and Jeff, but others are welcome to chime in as well. Just thinking about the current environment, like the environment. We have all sorts of climate disasters, horrible storms. There are farms that can't get USDA relief that are getting blasted by tornadoes and floods. Have you noticed, and Jeff, maybe as an operator, are you looking at sustainable products, sustainable materials, solar, things like that, kind of thinking ahead in the future for sustainable choices? Do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that George mentioned earlier just understanding the market. One of the things that I did was go out to LA and Colorado to actually understand that market, because eventually that's where Massachusetts is going to go. So I wanted to understand where we heading. So one of the things that you talked about, understanding that a lot of companies now, they're scaling back and focusing more on craft products and brands. So if anybody is planning on entering this industry right now, is to really focus on branding and how to enter this market and capturing market share. As far as what you just asked, yes, solar system is what we talked about. But again, it's not really going to solve that issue, because again, we use a lot of power. But a couple of things that we talked about using is solar panels, and also rainwater, to be able to recapture the rainwater and reuse those things. So that's one of the things that we've been talking about, but I'll leave it up to my head cultivator to figure out the plans for that. But those were the things that we talked about.
Thanks, and you mentioned an important part of all of this. How do all these decisions impact that sale, the customer at the end? And we're in a pretty woke society now. People are aligning with brands that they feel some sort of connection to, or that they share values. So certainly this impacts the customer at the end. So Jeff, do you see, or sorry, not Jeff, George, do you see your customers that are starting to build facilities being a little bit more environmentally responsible these days?
So if you look at the nature of a cultivation facility, it has a pretty horrific footprint. Uses a ton of water, a ton of electricity, and it's, anything that can be done to tighten the envelope, reduce power consumption, reuse water, is always helpful. In the end, they will still use a ton of power and a ton of water, but people are, whether they're motivated by their environmental interests or by the fact that it's going to cost them less to operate, they're definitely interested in having a very tight environment, very efficient environment, and using as little energy and resources as possible.
Jamie, you want to add anything there?
So I'm part of a coalition of cultivators on the regenerative soil side. So this is a huge conversation and very important to me and very passionate about. I come from California, the food belt of the country. There's going to be much larger conversations at hand over the next 15 years around water rights as a whole. So a lot of the facility design that we're focusing on in the industry is exactly what George points out. How can we grow this crop with the least amount of water? Because this is a smokable product, and I think we're going to have issues with just growing apples, simple enough. So there's a huge need for inventive ways and progressiveness around coming up with more sustainable ways for growing this. But working with your clients and even investors has been a huge struggle for me, because George points out putting the infrastructure in is literally putting in $500,000 of water recycling materials or equipment, and when you're looking at it from an investor standpoint, that's not a win. So a lot of times these things get cut out. The way I try to look at it is long term, the product price is going to go down. So in California, they only think about recycling their water because they have to by the state. What we've noticed in the state of Massachusetts, and what a lot of cultivators are going to start experiencing now, is that the state had requirements around energy and water usage and cannabis scorecards. That just started to go into effect this year, where they were checking them. So I think George might be getting a lot of calls here coming up pretty soon to work on some of those poorly designed fertigation systems. And in the state of Massachusetts, we're limited to the square footage of wattage we can use. So they better have a really strong plant bench lighting plan in terms of this. So the state of Massachusetts, and I really commend them for this, has some of the more stricter requirements in most states for energy usage, and that's been going on since medical. California has some very strict ones, but I think owner-operators are paying more attention to it, at least the ones that are paying attention to the price point, because it definitely affects it. And a lot of companies have been very successful in selling it as a sustainable product out west, which I think will be a marketing point moving forward on the east.
Thank you. And I want to go back to George. We had a call the other day where he mentioned kind of the flip side of things, where we just talked about people trying to make good decisions to be more sustainable and environmentally friendly. But then on the flip side, there are people that are operators that are making big investments on flashy stuff or the latest high-tech thing, gizmo, that by the time they're open, what was the point? So do you want to elaborate a little bit more on kind of those pitfalls that you're seeing?
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure if they're pitfalls, but I see both sides. A lot of people using the least expensive materials, trying to get their foot in the door and get operational. And then there's the other side where people are buying the latest and greatest thing, the $20,000 TV at Best Buy. Was the analogy I used. And I just think that people need to be cognizant when they make these decisions as to whether or not that piece of equipment is going to be obsolete, outdated, or outdone in 3 years from now. And is it really going to give you the return that you want?
Thank you. Anybody want to add on that? Okay, and I know you help, Jamie, people kind of make decisions about when to deploy funds at certain phases throughout their construction. You've certainly seen people trying to spend too much money on things that they don't need to spend
I
right
often
away.
do the thing with George where a client will come with this piece of equipment and I'll have to call George or Dave, who's in the back of the room, the owner of the company, and they think from a GC construction, mechanical, so do I. But there's things where I'm like, there'll be this new HVAC system or renewable generation, something that's just going to win it a light, right? A trucking company invented a light once for us. It was a dome light. If anything about cultivation, you need wide light across. So it's a trucking company that made. Long of the short is I spend a lot of time calling George and Dave being like, this doesn't make sense to me from a mechanical standpoint. I'm looking at the spec sheet and I don't understand why we just don't use the same HVAC that we've been using because this doesn't look any different. A lot of times it's just taking a piece of equipment and rebranding it for the cannabis company. Simplifying it in terms of understanding it has been my key sort of grounding point, and then relying on those that do construction to understand what your air intake and outtake is, and then rationalizing why we need this overpriced piece of equipment when the off-brand work just as well. So I do a lot of that with, they call it the grounding point.
All right, so we'll take some audience questions, but I want to just move along with a couple more here. So we talked earlier about host community agreements and how that's all changing, but we also have some new license types that are going to be coming out. So new types of facilities that are going to have their own regulations and special considerations. So I guess we'll start with Jamie. Let's start with social consumption. How is that changing things at the municipal level for the cannabis industry in general?
Not fast enough. So social use has been on the table for a while. There's a tremendous amount of weirdness with what's been moving forward with social consumption, but that is the new license. It was delivery licenses, those small need for facility and storage space. Now it's social use. There's a huge need for social use among a lot of things. Those that live in subsidized housing can't smoke indoors, so there's just the need for a place to consume. It's also changing the conversation around social use as a whole. But there's going to be a lot of interesting local and state requirements. The state of Massachusetts loves the health department, health and safety, and this is a consumable product with an intoxicating factor to it. I was someone who worked on the Cannabis Control Commission as an advisor and sort of worked with the health department to come up with ways around this, but there's going to be a lot of specific standalone buildings, separate ventilation, and maintaining a place that is clearly not around children. And the idea of outdoor consumption and outdoor venues, I think, is really going to be an angle to sort of work through this. There's going to be a lot of work that the CCC has to put together in terms of implementing it around what these facilities will really look like. But I'm happy to see it moving forward. I'm trying to be very politically correct right now. I wish I would have seen it done a little differently because smokable flower is still an issue, but this will be the new license on the table. Other states will move forward in a much more open manner. So those in New York and New Jersey will have much more of a retail sort of bar-like environment. Massachusetts likes to keep it a little more restrictive, so we'll keep to that, you New Englanders. It's adorable. But yeah.
And so when social consumption is here, just think of the variety of types of facilities and properties that those will involve. So large music venues.
Comedy
there's
shows.
A co-working facility down in New York. Little restaurants, all sorts, little things, big things. So lots of opportunity for those that are involved in construction and facility design there. But Jeff, I'm curious if you could talk about, obviously nobody's buying, well, maybe they're buying facilities right now for social consumption, but what do you think that's going to do for a real estate broker, kind of what their responsibility is in finding those properties. Can you comment on that at all?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I did, as I mentioned, I went to Colorado earlier this year to act, because they have a social consumption lounge there. They have a cannabis church, and it's more open. So there was a 420 bus as well, but I didn't get on that. So I went there to actually learn and see how they're doing it, so I could have a understanding of how Massachusetts is going to implement the regulations. Ultimately, like as Jamie just mentioned, that is those standalone buildings are really, prices on real estate is definitely going up already, and as we further this licensing process, I definitely see a lot of people, looking to acquire those buildings as well. I mean, I for myself been looking, I would drive by a building, I'll take a picture, send it to my partner, like, hey, what do you think about this? And sometime I'll go do my due diligence and get a more understanding about the property and try to get a contact with the owners. So I definitely see that happening, and I know from the, I'm actually on a board as well in Massachusetts, Social Consumption Board, to actually push the agenda and allowing this to happen in Massachusetts. So I definitely see a lot of people getting involved in the social consumption. I know Summit Lounge in Worcester has been leading the way so far. So it's, pretty much implementing those systems, and I definitely see the increase of real estate is going to play a role into this. Absolutely.
I do that too. I drive by like Boylston Street where there's empty storefronts or restaurants, and that would be a great consumption lounge. That would be a great dispensary. Let's do this, but we can't. And Rick, are we close to time?
Take your time.
All right. Or well, we can open it up for audience questions, I suppose. Why not? Anybody have a question? Yes, ma'am.
So, hold on, got to use a mic because we're on Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone at home wants to hear.
Gotta be official about it. Hi. Okay, so what's the viability of these buildings once we have interstate commerce? What do we do with these buildings, and what lessons do we need to look at from common ag tech in order to make these sustainable in a post-federal legalization environment?
Who wants to take that one?
That's a great question. I think a lot of us are looking at the federal regulations and have been in facility design, so see GMPs, following good agricultural practices, chain of custody. And I'm not plugging them, but I went with George and Dave very early on in the industry because of their lab experience and designing lab facilities, because taking an agricultural facility indoors causes a lot of problems from a health and safety, just basics, mold stuff. So not to bore you with all that, but there's a lot of stuff that's being implemented at the state, fortunately, in a lot of these regulated states, where they're moving forward with implementation that would mirror what it's like to go forward at a federal level. Just simply that this is not FDA regulated, right? We don't have to go through the Department of Ag or anything along those lines, but a lot of us in the industry follow that. And the big question that you asked, what happens to these facilities, right? So we can see what happened in California very early on, where it was a bit of a gray market, where they didn't spend a ton of money in facility design, and then they were forced into it. And a lot of them lost their companies because of that. So I really advise clients now, and have for years, in thinking about facility design with FRP, with what it takes to get these facilities designed so that they can pass a future inspection. And in my mind, that's what's going to make these facilities in Massachusetts so valuable long-term, is because they were forced to do that early on. So a lot of the facilities were selling licenses in California. It's just the paper license, not so much the facility, because they didn't upgrade to the newest fluid slates. Some of them are still using high-pressure sodium, which is 4 times the amount of power. So a lot of stuff I see value in paying close attention to the regulatory. Investors are now even asking if this could be a certifiable facility before they purchase. So investors are getting really savvy and having people like me come in and look at the facilities to make sure that it's a long-term investment. Especially around the explosion piece with these rooms. Great question.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, let's hold off on those questions right now. Show of hands, my question is, how many here are high right now? No, I'm kidding. No.
Coming
No,
down.
I am too. It was an hour
get back
ago,
to you.
so
Who had
it
a-
sort of
who-
mellowed out.
Oh, are you answering my question? I didn't think anyone would answer it, but that's all right.
Thank you, guys. It's been great so far. With the amount of cultivation facilities entering the market in the near future and the variance of size, is there a sweet spot? Where do you see the market going as far as the size of the cultivation facilities? Thank you.
What's your business plan, right? It's different for everyone. I just recently finished a project of my own that was a very small canopy to feed boutique for pre-rolls, and then I'll be able to purchase on the open market. What state that in? Every state is different. So if you're looking at a new emerging state, right? I love the New England winters, but I'm not kidding you guys. I've been schlepping it out for the East Coast opportunity, right? We just had 4 new states open up. But what does that look like from long-term success of these facilities and all that? You really have to pay attention to it for your market assumptions, right? So writing a business plan and looking at it overall, but I can say that it varies. I mean, just recently I got a project for 100,000 square feet, right? And one for 30,000, but it really depends. If you're forced vertically integrated under medical, most go relatively mid-size. I generally like a sweet spot of anywhere between 40 to 80. I'm not a big size matters kind of girl. I'm really not. I think ultimately in designing these facilities, and I've done this a few times, it's all about the operational flow of these facilities. So I had a little tiny kitchen, a mountain goat kitchen that was literally 1,000 square feet. I kicked the shit out of that facility and pushed through almost 100,000 units a month, right? So it's the design of the facility and the flow of the plants. But I don't think it's really a size. It's the market and what the operators plan to do with it long term, too. Yeah, that's a great question, loaded many ways.
Miss Kara always talks about the importance of the flow.
Yes. Oh, operational flow, my girl right there. Yes, ma'am.
Great panel, you guys, great information. Learned a lot from a lot of you guys up there. Question for you, Jamie. I know that you're from the West Coast, and this is more of I'm an insurance guy, so I have a question on the cultivation side. Have there been problems with drought? I know you guys spoke specifically about water and cultivators, and now that that is increasing in the amount that there is do you see any issues with business interruption happening from there being droughts in the area and these cultivators not being able to fulfill their orders or not being able to get all this stuff out there?
I mean, let's just talk about the fires. They wiped out 10 of my close friends, their entire crops, right, up in Mendo. I mean, the fires are huge up there. Water is very sensitive. It's like gold in California. So the insurance around drought, I don't know any drought coverage for cannabis plants. Maybe we should talk, but I can't find any. I can tell you that. Like even getting natural disaster coverage in California for crop insurance, and there's a lot of layers to that. Just getting earthquake insurance for a normal house is crazy where you live, right? So you think about it in terms of those dynamics, and this is an issue which we all should be made aware of. If I lose a crop in one of my facilities, the odds of that facility being able to recover from that is almost impossible, right? So you're out of commission for 6 months in a facility if you lose your entire crop. So that's a huge thing. So it's a huge concern around the drought piece, the fire piece. Theft has actually become the hugest concern in California. The ballsiness of everyone moving forward in terms of robbing and huge scale between the poor and the rich and all this other stuff, but there's a lot of robberies and stuff going on. So, and a lot of them have stopped attacking the retails and gone straight for deliveries and those sorts of things. So there's been some pushback on the claims, not with this gentleman, but others in terms of this. But I mean, we're not protected federally, so the lawyers definitely have to jump in and remind the insurance companies what's covered. But I mean, I constantly ask for more with the insurance guys. They don't give us what we want, but you keep pushing. I mean, it's not like a normal business, and you can speak to that too in terms of drought and fire and all of that.
I think you need to, Mark. I think you need to speak to that.
Well, at the end of the day, my advice to you is continue to push. Okay? Always ask, always push. It's a fight. The lawyers are going to be involved. The insurance company is going to do everything that they can to protect their financial statement. But at the end of the day, you need to continue to push because they need to come down on the side of this based upon the way the policy is written. And if the language is there and they don't want to pay it, this is completely, we've been involved in numerous claims. It's, there is arbitrary decisions that are made. And if it is pushed at the appropriate level, if it's pushed the appropriate way, decisions are reversed. Things are changed. From the insurance standpoint, there is absolutely zero standardization in every single policy that gets written. So somebody needs to be reviewing the language. Somebody needs to be looking at it. And at the end of the day, the owners, the operators, everybody's, you need to understand it. And if you're not going to take the time to understand it and want to be involved, then you need to work with somebody that you ultimately trust, because at the end of the day, if the insurance doesn't do what it was intended to do, then you're going to padlock the front door and it's over. You're just going to walk away. So it is absolutely critical, and I get it's a topic that nobody really likes to talk about, but people that purchase the products appropriately, use someone that they trust, when the claim is managed the way it needs to be, they become religious about the product because it did what it was intended to do. Back to the natural disaster piece, the business interruption piece, what I will tell you is that I agree, it is not readily available. The insurance companies don't want to give it. But what I will tell you is that the insurance companies are extremely greedy. And if there is a financial model that works for them, they would be more than happy to have a discussion with you.
It's that financial model that's
Okay,
so difficult, because we're talking about crop insurance. Well, it's just a bigger conversation in terms of the value of the crop at the time it's destroyed. And the because we don't have access to capital.
Correct.
So the weight of that capital in this industry is heavier. How do you explain that to regulators? That no. But therein lies the problem, is that we don't have a lot of coverage. So but I can say, in a positive note, it was just 6 years ago, we didn't even have crop coverage. So now crop coverage is a conversation that we can at least move forward with. So it does help to push forward with continuing the conversation.
Yeah,
over
the
time.
conversation does need to continue. There is the insurance industry, as in any other industry, we are historically well behind where the marketplace is on a day in and day out basis. We learn as we go. And back to the model that I made, when the insurance company sees an opportunity and they have the time to understand it and underwrite it, and they have the ability to make money at it, they'll be the first in line, okay, because they'll be very happy to take your cash and do something else with it. But we need to be able to show them and build the product so that it is a potential, granted, I'm going to say win-win, but at the end of the day, the insurance companies always wants to be on the right side of this, and they want to be able to make more money than they can. But it is, what we'll say is that it is negotiable at a certain level. It comes down to premium level. If there's not enough money to get any aspect of the risk associated with it, no one's going to engage in a conversation with you.
And it is that too, because it's different across the country.
Completely.
I mean, you can't even run a checklist for the cost per pound to say that this is the consistent revenue received. I've tried, but ultimately we like to fall with the California numbers if we could, just because that'd be easier for us. Attaching it to the revenue is ridiculous too. Bigger conversation. We'll keep chatting.
That's a different conversation based upon how you're going to price a product.
Yep,
And how
exactly.
you're going to look at it. The insurance companies get sort of boxed in, and this is the way we wrote it, and then it takes time to get through that. So it is an ongoing struggle that you have to have with underwriting, and it comes down to dealing with companies that are committed to the business and are engaged in this. And we want to do this versus someone that is just trying to get in and get out and make a quick buck at it from an underwriting standpoint.
Absolutely.
But as stated, if it continues to get pushed, it's being discussed all over the place. And as this continues, it's going to take the entire country over at a certain point in time, and the insurance industry is going to have to follow suit and deal with it from that side.
Does that change once it becomes legalized nationally?
Yeah, I mean, if we get recognized federally. I was just on a panel with regulators in DC discussing this. There's a lot of variables on how this is going to look, but, even simply with workman's comp, insurance, which being one of the more regulated and slow, similar to banking. But none of that's going to move forward. I think we're going to lose control of the Senate and the House from a congressional. So I don't think we're having any bills passed federally or legalizing anything for at least a few years. But if we do get federal legalization, then there'll be forced recognition for this being a viable industry, which would help us out a lot on many levels.
It would help dramatically from our standpoint, because insurance companies look at this as it's illegal,
Yeah.
and they don't want to have anything to do with it.
We're seeing similarities on the hemp side. So hemp is now federally legal, Delta 8, if you're synthetic or non-synthetic, but there's a lot of conversations that have changed so quickly on the insurance side for crop insurance, for all of that, with farmers specifically, which helped out a ton, though I've yet to see any of those in writing, so we'll see how that works. But it will change it, for sure.
Yeah, it comes down, based on this conversation, it's a supply-demand conversation. The more insurance companies we can get involved and that want to be in this business, the more competition gets created. The fewer companies, because certain of the major household brand name carriers stay away. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So we're dealing with, excess and surplus lines carriers that, when they realize that they don't have a lot of competition associated with it, they take advantage. So from that standpoint, if it did become federally legal, I think people are preparing to jump in, and it's a matter of time.
Mark, I had a question.
Another Mark in insurance.
Insurance. Mark
Mark with a K.
So on sticking to the property side with the crop situation, outdoor crop, you can't get coverage for it. Indoor crop's a different story. There are a lot of limitations to it. Can you talk to the other property limitations that people should be aware of? The wind condition, the named storm condition, some of the issues around equipment coverage, equipment breakdown coverage?
Well, what I'll tell you is that, back to my other point, where certain insurance companies are much more comfortable in providing the specific cover that you are talking about, where other ones are putting extremely tight restrictions on it. So the better underwriting data that we have regarding the specific situation and what ultimately a specific owner-operator is looking to insure, the tighter that facility is, the more up-to-date their information is going to put us in a much better position in order to negotiate it. And as we talked, dealing with multiple insurance companies, you're going to see some companies want to do it, some companies not going to want to do it. So there's no, I can't sit here and say, well, we're going to go to this company, they're going to do everything that we want. It's going to be very specific to the jurisdictions that we're in, ultimately the companies that we're dealing with, and ultimately what each risk looks like, because it's not, well, we're now going to offer this cover, so we're going to offer it to everybody, because everybody's business is run differently, structured differently, and looks differently from an underwriting standpoint. Some owner-operators are much more in-depth and take much more ownership in what they're doing. Others are much more hands-off, and they sort of fly by the seat of their pants. And we see that a lot at this point in time. And at the end of the day, coverage is available, but not with the terms and conditions or the pricing that you're going to want to have that's associated with it.
Well, I'll throw in another question. This is for Jeff, Jamie, and for Beth. You mentioned that Braintree, they're kind of changing their tone on what they think of the industry and maybe even accepting some operations. And Beth, also, you said Norwell.
Yep.
And Jamie, you mentioned that there's a lot of cities and towns that are kind of switching their thinking. And what is the main reason are you finding that they're changing their tone?
Do we answer in unison on this one?
Tax dollars.
Cha-ching.
Cha-ching. Tax dollars.
Yeah, money.
Very smart lobbyists told me very early on, if you can attach the state to the same revenue that you're making in any way, shape, or form, you'll forever be successful. And I think that's what we figured out. That's what it is, ultimately.
Yeah, and there's also been some pressure from the actual operators. Haverhill is a great example in leading the cause here, where basically they challenge the town, show us the harm that the presence of our business has created that necessitated the use of the funds that we've set aside with our host community agreement with our local impact fee. And they're not able to produce that. So they're out in Northampton, Lee, I'm sure there's others, but they're kind of from their government, kind of the local government decided, not through advocacy from people or for businesses, but the mayor of Northampton said, hey, this industry has only brought good to us. We don't have horrible robberies and crazy things happening. There are people coming and contributing to our gas stations, restaurants. stores, everything. So he, I forget his name. It was a couple years ago, but Northampton was the first one that said, hey, this isn't causing the harm that this impact fee was supposed to cover. So we're going to see more of that.
Also, too, I want to remind people that weren't here back then, but Ms. Crabtree remembers, but a lot of cannabis was, there was a huge amount of the war on drugs that was very successful in the state of Massachusetts in confusing this product with opioids. So the addiction rate in the state is extremely high, and for those that have lost loved ones to the addiction, I apologize, but I've witnessed it in terms of just the amount of devastation. I was the first one to get approved in the city of Boston, but I had to go through a series of community board meetings that were probably the most excruciating and heart-wrenching, and all of that was around the miseducation of this product. So what you point out, Beth, is that even though it is taxes, I will say for the state of Massachusetts, that was not important early on. So there's been a cultural shift that's taken place with normalizing it through medical that you guys may not recognize as much as I do coming from the West Coast, but there was a lot of people that were really fearful of this product early on. So I think that culturally we're seeing a change because ultimately a lot of us are really good owner-operators, you know, in terms of seeing the success and the community engagement too. So I think conversations changed that allowed it for the taxes to be allowable for them to take, but it definitely was a cultural shift too.
Well, wouldn't you say that I would say almost all of the operators have to be really good
Passionate.
business people and community people?
Yeah, they're actually, in Massachusetts, all of the licensees are required to have both a positive impact plan and a diversity plan. It's mandated by our regulations. So diversity plan kind of speaks for itself, but the positive impact plan is a separate document that they're supposed to submit. Like I mentioned earlier, some businesses utilize Elevate Northeast. They're contributing to us. We're educating the public. That's a positive impact that they're baking into their business. But they do other things like job fairs, expungement clinics, all sorts of things like that. So while that positive impact plan is required, businesses approach it a little bit differently, kind of depending on where they're located.
I think this is more for Jamie, but I think it goes to Mark as well. Can you talk a little bit more about GMP and GACP as well as, you know, with those type of standardizations, will it help actually within the insurance industry if there's more standardization with, like even like the fire regulations, because we see that in a lot of different facilities that every town decides what they want is good or bad. It's very like the fire inspectors and then they're getting marched up to the state inspectors. But if there was some standardization, can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, we as an industry struggle back at, you know, what he's pointing out is a great piece to this because I always advocate for the best interest or the best insurance rates based off the design of the facilities on the cultivation standpoint. It hasn't gotten me some better rates, but maybe he hears now. I don't know. But it's a great point. The key piece for me is that I've highlighted it through the process. Standardization on the East Coast seems to be more of a progressive conversation. So it's been taking place longer here because this was the first state that required us to have insurance and escrow prior to getting a license. So it pulled in the insurance companies to have it. But I mean, I push forward with just the general agricultural practices when it comes to crop loss, right? Because that's what a lot of farmers do. Say, I follow these protocols, so if there's a crop loss, I'm not liable for it because I have this process in place. Try to explain cultivation recipes and calendars and just the very basics is where we are right now. So there's the learning curve. I'm proud that we have trim, shake, byproduct broken down now into subcategories with insurance companies, but continuing the conversation for the owner-operators with construction companies to maintain certification or there's no certification for our facilities just yet, but preparation for it is hugely important. Just in understanding that if you're going to be growing $3, $4, $5 million worth of product, if you don't have the proper infrastructure with insulation and all that, your crops aren't going to make it through anyways. So just it's a good best business practice. But I'm not sure if you're adding value to the facilities based off of the design piece with the actual good agricultural practices and CMP stuff.
Standardization from our side, from the insurance standpoint, is a critical piece. It ultimately allows, as I was stating before, the more comfortable underwriting can be with what a situation is, the more aggressive they're going to be with their pricing. And, you know, I'm not going to say bad stuff about, you know, insurance people, but, you know, sometimes underwriters, they're not the brightest bulbs. Okay, so if they can check the boxes and they know what they need, and this is the system, this is what everybody has, this is the protections that are in place, these are the design functions that are there, they're going to be, this is perfect for us, we're going to price it extremely aggressively. Trying to teach them through the process and educate them along the way is extremely difficult. That onus then falls upon the brokerage community to educate the underwriting aspect of it. So it makes our job much easier, and yeah, at the end of the day, from an insurance side, the more bullets we have in our gun, the more aggressive we're going to be, and that's what it comes down to. And as standardization comes into play, I don't want to say it makes our job easier, but it does from that standpoint of being able to say, look at this facility, look at everything that they're doing, this is what is being required, this is the boxes that we're checking, they're hitting all of it. So I do think it'll be extremely important in the long term.
Yeah, just because of standardization, I was just thinking, because I was reading something, like, you talked to someone about, it's a nationalization of fire department, and they're talking about, they're writing some bills, to basically say, these are the minimum requirements, this is what we recommend for facilities, because as you go into some of them, they don't even, like, they just don't know. It's not really not educated, these inspectors in the town, municipalities, they just don't, there's no definition. They're just trying to.
There's no definition, it's brand new for them. They're learning it. Yeah, like I said, you don't know what you don't know, and they're learning this through the process.
But it was the state of Colorado that really forced the hand for the National Fire Code to be updated. So in 2019, we now have extractions explained in depth in the fire code nationally. That was huge for us in the industry in terms of acknowledgement. I write a line on every insurance little questionnaire, and we follow the National Fire Code in terms of this to up it. Like, I continuously add lines to my insurance notes at the bottom, whether they read them or not, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's huge. We do have recognition from the National Fire, at least in terms of that piece for zoning around it, for BHO, for volatiles, all of it.
And those standardizations also, and adopting those good manufacturing principles, those can also trickle down to the customer as well and be a brand differentiator for a business. People want to know that they're buying a safe product, or know that it wasn't just cooked up in somebody's basement kitchen. So those types of changes to your construction or your design layout, the flow, those can be a competitive differentiator too. So do we want to take the Zoom questions?
Yeah, we have a couple on the Zoom, and Dylan will.
Is that to me?
Go, George.
Well, I could answer that if you want. It might not be right, but I can answer
No,
it.
Based on what I was saying earlier on, if someone has a group like mine involved at the get-go, there are advantages to be yielded from that. You can choose the right property. You can understand what the costs would be, have a good idea of what the costs would be and what your options are. When I show up and it's plans and specs done, there's often some uncomfortable conversations that take place once they realize that there are deficiencies that could have been avoided.
All right, and the second question.
And just to go a little further on that, and I agree with what you said, but it definitely is a very important part of the construction or the project management of the project. Start at the beginning, right from the get-go, because it ends up adding to the cost when you bring them in like 2 stages down the road.
A lot of us these days have taken on to being construction managers, operating on an open book platform where we come in during the design phase. We offer valuable input to the designers, do cost checking, just kind of help the design through so you're designing to a target value. So it saves time and money in the design, and ultimately, when the drawings are stamped, you're ready to build it. And that's a whole conversation for a different panel maybe, but.
Well, and I think it's important what George is pointing out, that I bring George on during the programming and the floor plan stage, because George checks the architect and makes sure he stays within budget, which is hugely important in my mind, in the sense that the architect isn't going to be there at the end when George is costing it out. And there may be a situation where that wall that I put in that I don't really need is some structural thing that I didn't really know about that is going to cost money. So I think bringing on the GC early on is hugely important in terms of even just understanding material cost around if I can save money here or there, which I've worked very closely with George and Dave on a few projects, and it's been hugely helpful with the open book. I advocate for that. And at the end of the day, having them come on early to sort of keep the engineers and the architect in check in terms of hopes and dreams and what we can actually afford is really how I look at it.
You end up with a collaborative group that's designing towards one common goal. And at the end of the day, you do it once and it's done correctly.
I mean, George gets the pictures before we even buy it, right?
We
Make
call
sure
that
it's workable.
smooth sailing. That's what it's called.
Jeff, do you want to add anything from the, like a renter, from a lease perspective on when to bring in someone for, or whether it's architect or construction?
As soon as possible.
Yeah.
Same thing, as soon as possible. I mean, I'm going through the same thing. I started with my with the architect, and my partner is our contractor. So then once we started really going into it, then we noticed that there was some deficiencies there that we had to go back again. And I mean, there was at one point, I believe it was in January or something like that, we was behind a couple of weeks because we had to bring in the architect back again, because there was on one of the walls it poked out a little bit, so we didn't notice that in the beginning. So now we lost about like two foot from our retail space, so we had to go back and remeasure the space. So I had to sit there like, Jeff, that's on you. It is what it is. You know what I mean? So it was my fault. So, but yeah, you definitely should bring in the contractor, everybody, as soon as possible to take away those little things. Because again, something that you may see, something that you may not see, they will see it. So absolutely.
Thank you. Back to Zoom?
Yes, so Krista's second question is, how do you deal with concerns of neighborhoods or towns about the smell produced from cultivation?
It smells so good, Krista.
Hey, are you referring to the smoke? That doesn't smell bad. This is a big one, George. So this is huge, the smell of facilities. What George and I have been pointing out in terms of putting your team together early on, you really need to have an understanding of proper ventilation, intake, outtake, and there's some amazing systems in place now that have sort of stepped up to our level around smell. Believe it or not, in some municipalities and states, they have a smell gauge, right? Very similar to how they test manure, very similar to hiding and there's a whole sorts of fun regulatory stuff I learn about in this industry, but there's smell.
Professional sniffers, right?
Professional sniffers, if you will. Yeah. I grew up in an agricultural community. There were sniffers everywhere about whether or not this was healthy for us to be breathing in all this cow manure, right? So cannabis has a very grass-like smell, and it's pungent, and it's not an off-putting smell, but it's pungent. So cultivation facilities have to have a strong understanding of proper sealing of rooms and design of rooms and all of that, but really it relies on your engineer team, right? Your HVAC team, the mechanical side of it, to make sure that you have proper intake, outtake for these rooms. And there's a bit of a metric that I use on my build-outs. George, I'm sure, has got his own system, too, that you see, and I'm sure George has seen a lot of interesting stuff, too, in terms of going in after the fact and trying to retrograde or upkeep the system. So smell's a huge one, and there's a lot of layers to it. I can say going through Medway just recently, they probably had the most excruciating requirements around noise and smell. So big issues around that, where we actually had to run probably, $150,000 worth of, infrastructure and testing and all of this. So smell is actually very costly for operators to think about.
I also wanted to, when the question was asked about social consumption, I wanted to bring that up, that I think the smarter operators will take that strongly into consideration in having really good scrubbing and air changes, because you don't want to detract other clientele that isn't necessarily there to smoke. That was my personal take on that.
I mean, we've been advocating too, it's very similar to casinos. So you think about that intake, outtake process, right? And then you think about it from just the cultivation standpoint that you got to have a lot of fresh air coming in and out of that facility just in general. So that's pulling out a lot of that smell. So I'm real sensitive to making sure I got some layers in there for the smell factor, because that's the first thing the municipality will come towards the owner operator in terms of complaints in the community.
In the last 20 years or so, we've all become really against secondhand smoke and the smell of any sort of smoke, be it in a building, on a street, and sorry to get back on social consumption, but
it's a good
that will
point.
be a huge factor when that comes online.
Zoning, you can't have these facilities in a lot of places, because in the state of Massachusetts, there's a 2,500-foot rule, right? Non-smoking in front of certain. So, I mean, there'll be a lot of layers. And there is a way to do it right. There really is. But it will have to be done right.
All right, we have one more from Ezra P. When you say stable market, how stable? Question mark. 1,800 a pound? Question mark? Question mark. How about the proposed doubling of cultivation square feet coming online in Massachusetts? Question mark? Question mark.
Oh, that's okay. I can follow the thought process. I've got a few clients that text me a lot of those. I break it down. So he wants to know, or she wants, sorry, I didn't even get the gender. Ezra, thank you. Would like to know what the assumptions are going to be in the future market based off of all the cultivations we've been seeing coming online, and George can jump in as well in terms of those that understand it, but the price point's going to go down. It really is. I mean, that's where we are right now. We came into this market at the glory days of 3,800 a pound, 42, 64 at some points in what markets. You were real early. I know, baby, I know, different time. But when we sit here now, you really have to be sensitive to everything we're talking about. Operational flow of the facility, the amount of money it's going to take to build the facility out, how long is it going to take for you to get revenue producing, how long will you get that top value for the product. But it's a concern that I have with conversations that I have with a lot of owner-operators currently in the state of Massachusetts. A few facilities have lessened their idea of being vertically integrated in this state because of it. So in my mind, that means it's opened up to more of a capitalistic sort of environment in the sense that we're going to see some competition. So the good news is consumers are going to be purchasing a lot more cannabis from facilities in the state. So that is going to help the assumptions as well, because not a lot of us are paying $300 an ounce right now in the state, where in other states it's $80 an ounce. So I see it as an ebb and flow and a good and a positive in the sense that it'll bring in more consumers into the market as well.
A lot of dynamics there. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I'm a civil engineer. I'm often tasked with my clients trying to help them get through the regulatory process and make communities feel comfortable with this new endeavor, let's say. And I had to actually have a professional nose that we had to hire somebody that would go as a condition on the permit, that would stand at the property line twice a year and sniff and make sure that it met
How much do they
some-
get paid for that?
Yeah,
It's in the bylaws, believe it or not.
But now I have a client that wants to do an outdoor grow, and I can't do anything for an outdoor grow, but I'm wondering, question, what do you see the viability of outdoor grow in New England? You talked about out in the West Coast, and obviously they make it work out there. I have to advise my client on the due diligence phase of if they can be insured. They often ask me to just tell them what are the pitfalls of that, and I don't have a lot of answers on the outdoor grow because I don't have experience there yet.
You guys produce a lot of outdoor crops in general in the state of Massachusetts that I'm unaware of, is general response from a girl who comes from an agricultural background. So I think there's a lot of bright-eyed bushy tails running around with some good ideas that if you've never grown corn, don't go buy some corn equipment and think you'll be successful at it, maybe. I'm unclear why George and I have had this conversation. I've been here for 10, 11, 15 years. Never once have I had an inkling to go outdoor.
It's dark and cold.
Yeah,
Amen.
very moldy.
Amen.
But
4 o'clock, y'all, it gets dark. All right? I got 9 o'clock sunshine all in California. Different worlds, people. Different worlds.
so do you think outdoor people are generally going for product manufacturing? Because it's not, the flower will be hard.
Oh, and there's definitely, hemp is a conversation that we keep leaving off the table, but there's a lovely outdoor crop. There is a crop that will do amazing things. Hempcrete, infrastructure, build out, tons of it. I think people are short-sighted and not really understanding the full capability of both cannabis and hemp, just hemp from a regenerative piece. So there's a lot of opportunity on the hemp side in various states. But upstate New York, no offense to Massachusetts, they get a lot more sunshine. So maybe they might be more successful.
Hi again. So I have two questions, actually, one for George and one for Jamie. For George, where do you see materials pricing going with the way the economy is right now, what we're future casting, and supply chain limitations or corrections? Do you see the cost of all of these fun materials improving? And for Jamie, you just talked about the cost of flour coming down. Do you also see the cost per milligram on infused goods coming down, or do you see that as remaining steady?
I'm writing it down, George. You tell me how much I got to add to my budget right now.
I honestly don't have a good answer for that. Who would have thought that microchips in China would affect an entire world like this? I keep thinking that it's done, and then it keeps getting harder to get and more expensive. So, sorry, I'm not the person to ask.
Could you give us a percentage? No, because I'm sitting next to him and I might hit the floor is why I won't do it, probably. Sorry, that was shock. What was the question for me? I forgot. I was just waiting for am I adding 3 million? I think it's going to go down across the board, right? When you look at it, it's going to become more favorable for manufacturers to purchase extraction at a cheaper rate. We've seen huge success in the state of Massachusetts. This is an edible state, you know? The attraction to edibles has been what has brought me here. It's been very successful for me, but it's amazing in terms of eating and really consuming the product. So that I see as being an opportunity that we are missing a huge market. For a lot of us that have the luxury of paying $30 for 100 milligrams, a lot of people don't have that luxury. So I think that it's going to be a huge benefit for the price point to go down. I know people are scared of it, but I also came from a very competitive market and was very successful in that market because I had such an access to a consumer. So what we're going to see are the cream rising to the top, right? So maybe a lot of these larger manufacturers that haven't paid attention to quality won't be as important moving forward, and it'll be like a real consumable, right? Lots of candy bars, but brand loyalty. I'm excited to see what comes because it's frustrated me in the sense that there are a lot of people that are not accessing this product in the state of Massachusetts that should. So the price point will go down. Maybe the edibles won't be at a top price point they are now, but they'll come down in a way that I think they'll be able to sell more of them. So operators need to be, as you preach all the time to your clients, they need to be real good at their operational flow, right? To make sure they can keep up with the demands.
Jamie, why don't you talk about what would happen if it became federally legal with the price per pound when you just mentioned states that were selling for $8 an ounce?
Well, geez, George, now the gloomy talk, right? Glooms. Look, it's basically looking at this like a viable industry as it is anywhere else, in the sense that there are some high risks, high rewards, but you got to be real smart about where you put your money and where you go with your opportunities. So if we have interstate commerce, right, which we do not have currently, if we are allowed to sell, then this becomes like a basic commodity in an agricultural crop. So the viability of large crops being produced in the state of Massachusetts, no. But maybe this is the home and the house to a lot of boutique, strong cannabis manufacturers who then become the Chips Ahoy's and the Coca-Colas, right? So I look at, and this being a loaded question, maybe why it was asked, but I look at the whole entire country in a different way than most people do, and I travel according to where it's going to be the most successful, right? So there are a lot of opportunities in a lot of different places. If you're going to cultivate, Massachusetts may not be the long-term success for you, but if you're going to create a flower brand with long-term success for future opportunities elsewhere, then maybe. But I think just thinking about it simply early on when people coming into a state saying they would be successful because they were only one of a few is done. And now there's a high level of competition that I'm very happy to compete in because I think it's only going to make the market stronger It'll make the insurance underwriters have to be forced to drop their prices. It'll become federally legal, but it'll push us forward. So any product that makes the percentages that we make in terms of what 150 times revenue, we've been living in a bubble. That's not going to last. So
it's important to have a strong marketing and branding company.
well, and
agree,
a
Beth?
quality product. I mean, before the marketing and branding, don't get caught in the hype. You better have a good product that supports
Good product,
a good
yeah.
product.
Now, Jeff, all this being said and done, you're going to open up a dispensary. Now, what do you think after hearing everything today?
Well, I mean, I prepared myself for everything. Everybody, we all talked about here. Like I said, you know, at the end of the day, you're all going to make mistakes. I made some mistakes, as I mentioned. Some of the things that I did was go out to California, I've been going to LA since 2010, and just really just understanding that market where we are now. So one of the biggest things is understanding to create a brand, because that's where the market is going to. So I've been, you know, really focused on pushing and creating the low-key brand and making sure that we have brand recognition so we could, you know, have a great market share in Massachusetts and also in Boston, specifically in Boston.
So you also agree on the locations now of
Absolutely.
your dispensaries or your grow facilities?
Yes.
Does that play an important part right now?
Absolutely. I mean, my first retail store is right in Carbon Square, which you know, it's next to a parking lot, train station, a lot of foot traffic. So you know, I really got a great retail space. And as far as the cultivation, it's an indoor cultivation that we planning on utilizing. And also we plan on utilizing Agrify, which is a vertically integrated vertical farming system, you know, just so we could keep that consistency in our grow and our flower, so we could be able to, you know, move those boxes from different places, and just to also always maintain that same consistency on our products. So everything that we just talked about here is you know, a lot of things that I did my due diligence on, you know, just to have an understanding of.
And I think that's the key, the due diligence that you have to
Indeed.
do to open up any type of facility.
Any business. I mean,
Well,
this is
yeah.
something that I learned in real estate. You know, you have to do your research and development, you know, before you know, take on a project. So I basically took the same approach, you know, as far as cannabis, going out, like I said, California, going out to Denver, Vegas, Toronto, you know, all the markets that's pretty much been up and running, all the mature markets. I went there to do some due diligence, talk to people and learn, and see what I have to apply here in Massachusetts. So, sure.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I want to thank you. Oh, we got one more question. After that, we're going to have to close it out. We're running a little late.
People love talking about this stuff, Rick.
If you serve us dinner, we'll stay.
We talked a little bit about federal legalization and competitiveness in the market. How important is it, you know, and international trade is important for GMPs and really sustainable, and you talked about regenerative farming and other things, but how important is it for anybody that's really building out and planning new facilities in today's market and where things are going to really have those things in place and really think about good manufacturing practices, streamlined operations, really things that can really, we talked about it, important for insurance rates, but how important is it to even compete or even do business with food companies and medical companies and international partners?
Man, this is a great question, especially when you talk about hemp, right? So hemp has a viable opportunity to be certified and then be an export, right? Because it's federally legal. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities and a lot of facilities that I've been working with on the hemp side that are doing CBD extraction processes or preparation for that, or they've already aligned it. A lot of them have food chemists on board. A lot of them have a strong food manufacturing backgrounds from big industries, right? So we're seeing that now on the hemp side. International trade is an interesting conversation on the cannabis side because there is international trade with Canada and other states, Uruguay and Germany and all that. But in terms of international trade with cannabis, it would have to be federally recognized, but it also goes against our going with NATO. So there's a huge sort of Federal 1, Schedule 1, and it's illegal in a lot of other countries, and it's on the list to not be distributed. So there's a lot of policy and politics with it being distributed or exported out that are tied to a lot of things that I don't know how easily cannabis would be, but on the hemp side, oil and flower, in terms of import-export, it's an interesting conversation. What we'll be importing and what we'll be exporting in terms of on the hemp side.
I'll say that I think the smarter operators are designing and operating at a GMP level because if and when it happens, there's no learning curve. And that starts with the layout, the flow, but it also has to do with the SOP, just how you do your day-to-day activities and getting your staff understand what to do and what not to do in the facility. And I think that it's a large learning curve, and anyone who does that now takes the time and effort is going to be ahead of the game.
It's kind of dressing for the part you want. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, so much. And thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Beth. Always a pleasure to have you as a
Always.
moderator. I want to thank you all. Great speakers, lots of great knowledge and information. Look for our Connecticut event. That will be a webinar on July 14th, and that will also have a touch on a little bit about the legalization of cannabis in Connecticut and new construction and development there as well. I want to thank our sponsors before we go. I want to thank Key Construction Services as our networking sponsorship. Yeah, give George a big hand. Give Key Construction a big hand. And our corporate sponsors, Elevate Northeast, Northmark, U.S. Pavement Services. If you didn't see my friend Ken Sprague out there, he's usually at every one of our events, and U.S. Pavement is the right paving company to use whenever you're doing a job out there. Inspired Technology, Margot DeStefano Architects. And again, thank you to Key Construction Services. And I want to thank you all for attending today. I want to thank everyone on Zoom. And until next time, I'm Rick Kaplan from the New England Real Estate Journal.
Nicely done, guys.
Mentioned solar on the panel.